If you ever hear a man say you're carrying his child before you've even met him, don't assume he's crazy. Assume your life is about to change. That was the last normal thought I had before the church doors slammed open. I was halfway down the aisle, my father's arm steady beneath my trembling fingers, the organ playing soft and sweet under the vaulted white ceiling of St. Matthew's in downtown Boston. 200 guests stood to watch me marry the safest choice I had ever made. Then the doors hit the walls with a crack that echoed like thunder. Every head turned. Mine last. He stood framed by sunlight, tall, at least 6'3", wearing a black tailored suit that fit like it had been sewn onto him. Dark hair brushed back, eyes the color of winter ocean water. Calm, controlled, like he hadn't just interrupted a wedding. 6 men in dark suits lingered behind him, not touching anyone, not speaking, just existing in a way that made space clear on its own. The music faltered. My fiancé whispered, "What the hell is this?" The stranger didn't look at him. He looked at me, directly, like he had every right. "Stop the ceremony," he said evenly. Not loud. He didn't need to be. "She's carrying my child." Laughter rippled once, then died. My bouquet slipped in my grip, white roses brushing against the lace of my dress. My heart didn't just race, it stalled. Because 2 hours earlier, in a quiet clinic 12 blocks from this church, a doctor had closed the door gently and said the same words. 12 weeks pregnant. I had stared at the ultrasound screen like it belonged to someone else. I had never cheated, never even come close. I had never seen this man in my life. And yet he stepped forward now, measured and certain, like this moment had been scheduled. "You don't know me," I managed, my voice thin in the cathedral air. A faint shadow of something crossed his expression. Not anger, not doubt, something deeper. "You don't remember," he corrected softly. My fiancée moved toward him, furious, but one subtle lift of the stranger's hand stopped everything without contact. Even the priest went silent. The stained glass light painted colors across the marble floor between us. My pulse thundered in my ears. 8 months ago, he continued, eyes locked on mine. There was a fire in a high-rise on 5th Street. You were inside. My breath caught. Smoke. Sirens. A staircase filled with heat. A memory I had filed away as shock and confusion. I remembered waking up outside. I remembered a paramedic saying I was lucky. I did not remember him. "I carried you out," he said. Not dramatic. Not pleading. Just fact. The church felt smaller, like the walls had leaned in to listen. And someone made sure you forgot. The silence inside the church did not feel holy anymore. It felt calculated, like everyone was waiting for me to confirm or deny something I did not understand myself. My father's hand tightened around mine. I could feel him shaking, though he would never admit it. My fiancé, Daniel, stepped forward again, his voice sharp and protective. "This is insane. She has never even seen you before." The man's gaze never left my face. Not once. "You are wrong," he said quietly. "She saw me. She just does not remember." My heart pounded so hard I thought I might faint. I searched his expression for arrogance, for cruelty, for anything that would make this easier to dismiss. But what I saw unsettled me more. Certainty. Not obsession. Not performance. Certainty. "What is your name?" I asked, because somehow that felt like the most important thing in the room. "Adrian Romano." The name rippled through the guests in hushed whispers. I recognized it. Everyone in Boston did. Real estate. Shipping. Charitable foundations with polished press releases and photographs of hospital wings bearing the Romano name. Power, wrapped in philanthropy. Daniel laughed under his breath. "You cannot just walk into a church and make a claim like that." Adrian reached into his jacket slowly, deliberately, and produced a sealed envelope. He handed it to the priest instead of to me. Even now, he respected the structure of the room. The priest hesitated before passing it to my father. Inside was a single document from a private medical laboratory in Manhattan. My name. Adrian's name. A probability percentage that made my knees weaken. 99.9%. I felt the aisle tilt beneath me. "That is impossible," I whispered. "I have never." I could not even finish the sentence. Adrian's voice softened, but it did not lose its strength. "You were unconscious for nearly 30 minutes after the fire. Smoke inhalation. Confusion. You signed hospital forms. You do not remember signing." The memory flickered like a damaged reel of film. A stretcher. Oxygen. A man's voice telling me to stay awake. green exit signs glowing through haze. I had told everyone afterward that I escaped on my own, that I did not need help, because independence had always been my armor. Why would I not remember you? I asked. He stepped one pace closer, stopping at a respectful distance. Because someone made sure you did not. The air shifted again. This was no longer about embarrassment or spectacle. This was about something hidden, something intentional. Daniel's hand reached for mine, but I pulled away without meaning to. My mind was racing backward 8 months, replaying every hospital visit, every follow-up appointment, every unexplained headache I had blamed on stress. Charlotte, Adrian said carefully, like he was handling something fragile. You were not supposed to walk away from that building alone. And you were never supposed to be carrying my child without protection. My breath caught. Not fear. Not anger. Something colder. If he was telling the truth, then someone had rewritten my life without my consent. And this wedding was not the beginning of my future. It was the interruption of a past I never knew existed. The room did not feel like a church anymore. It felt like a courtroom, and I was standing trial for a life I did not remember living. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and uneven beneath the lace collar of my wedding dress. Daniel was still beside me, but the space between us had shifted, stretched thin by something neither of us could name. This is manipulation, he said, his voice tight. You cannot just appear with paperwork and rewrite her reality. Adrian did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He simply looked at me, as if I were the only person whose opinion mattered. Charlotte, he said carefully. Did any doctor explain why your follow-up records from that night were transferred out of state? My mind snagged on that detail. Transferred. I remembered asking the hospital for a copy of my discharge summary weeks after the fire. They had told me the file was incomplete. Administrative error. I had accepted that answer because it was easier than pressing further. Hospitals make mistakes, Daniel insisted. This is a coincidence. But my stomach twisted because the clinic this morning had not felt like a mistake. The doctor had avoided my eyes when she mentioned that the initial prenatal blood work was unusual, that there were older hormone markers in my system, ones that suggested medical monitoring I did not recall. Why would someone do that? I asked Adrian, my voice barely steady. Why would someone erase you from my chart? He stepped closer, not touching me, but close enough that I could see the faint scar along his left eyebrow. Because you were never supposed to be connected to me publicly, he answered. And because the child you are carrying changes the line of succession in my family. A murmur moved through the pews. Line of succession. This was not about romance. This was about legacy. My fingers tightened around the bouquet until the stems bent. I am not part of your family, I said. You do not get to decide that. Something flickered in his expression then. Not dominance. Not ownership. Something almost protective. I am not deciding, he replied. Someone else already tried to. The words settled heavy in my chest. I replayed the night of the fire again. The alarms. The heat pressing against my skin. A pair of arms lifting me. A voice telling me to stay with him. I had assumed that was a firefighter. A stranger paid to help. I never asked for a name. If this is true, I whispered, more to myself than to him. Then someone had access to my medical records. My body. My future. The idea made my pulse spike. Not because of him. Because of the invisible hands behind the scenes. Daniel reached for me again, softer this time. Charlotte, we can leave. Right now? We do not have to entertain this. Leave. The words sounded simple. Clean. But Adrian's next sentence stopped me in place. If you walk out of here without protection, he said quietly, you will not just be leaving me. You will be walking straight back into whatever plan was set in motion 8 months ago. And for the first time since he walked through those doors, I realized this might not be about him crashing my wedding. It might be about him preventing something worse. The word protection did not sound romantic. It sounded strategic. Calculated. I looked at Adrian as if I were seeing him for the first time, not as the man who had interrupted my wedding, but as someone standing between me and something I could not yet see. Protection from who? I asked. My voice no longer trembled. It sharpened. The organist had quietly stepped away. Guests remained frozen in the pews, pretending not to listen while absorbing every word. Daniel's hand hovered near my elbow, uncertain now instead of possessive. Adrian exhaled slowly, as if choosing honesty over convenience. There are members of my extended family who believe control is safer than uncertainty, he said. 8 months ago, I was scheduled to announce a corporate merger. Instead, there was a fire. Instead, you were inside the building. The memory pulsed again behind my eyes. I had been there for a charity planning meeting. Nothing controversial. Nothing political. Just invitations and seating charts. Are you suggesting that fire was not an accident? Daniel demanded. Adrian did not answer him. He answered me. I am suggesting that you were not random. The word landed harder than anything else. Not random. I had spent months telling myself I was lucky. Lucky to survive. Lucky to walk away with only a lingering cough and a few blurred memories. Now it sounded less like luck and more like design. You think someone wanted me connected to you? I asked. Or removed from you? His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Either outcome benefits someone who prefers leverage. The church felt colder despite the June heat pressing against the stained glass. Leverage. Succession. Monitoring. These were not words that belonged in a bridal aisle. My father cleared his throat softly, a reminder that he was still there, still witnessing his daughter's life tilt sideways. Charlotte, he said gently, what do you want to do? The question should have been simple. Walk away. Cancel the ceremony. Pretend this was all a dramatic misunderstanding. But the ultrasound image from that morning flashed in my mind. A small flicker on a grainy screen. Real. Undeniable. If I leave with you, I said to Adrian, what happens next? He did not hesitate. You come somewhere secure. You review every medical record yourself. You speak to doctors not chosen by me. You verify every claim. He paused. You decide what you believe. It was the first time he had offered me a choice instead of a declaration. Daniel stepped back slightly, hurt flickering across his face. You cannot seriously consider this. I turned toward him slowly. I had always admired how steady he was. Predictable. Safe. But safe suddenly felt like ignorance. If someone altered my medical history, I said quietly, then this is bigger than today. My wedding dress suddenly felt heavy, symbolic of a future I no longer understood. Adrian extended his hand, not commanding, not demanding, just waiting. You deserve the truth, he said. The church doors behind him stood open, sunlight pouring in like a second chance or a warning. And as the guests held their breath, I realized the aisle I was standing on no longer led to marriage. It led to answers. I did not remember walking down the aisle toward him. I only remember the sound of my heels against marble, too loud in the silence, too final. My father released my arms slowly, like he was letting go of something fragile. Daniel said my name once, sharp and disbelieving, but I could not turn around again. If I did, I would choose comfort. And comfort suddenly felt dangerous. When I reached Adrian, I did not take his hand immediately. I looked at it first. Steady. Open. Not forcing. If this is manipulation, I said quietly, so only he could hear. It is the most elaborate lie I have ever seen. His expression did not shift. Then verify it, he replied. Outside, the summer air hit my skin like cold water. The city sounded normal. Traffic. A distant siren. Someone laughing on the sidewalk across the street. It was disorienting how ordinary the world felt when mine had just fractured. A black sedan waited at the curb. No tinted drama. No urgency. Just a driver standing respectfully beside the door. Adrian did not touch me as we walked. He stayed half a step behind, as if guarding rather than guiding. I glanced back once. Through the church doors, I saw white flowers and confused faces and the version of my life that would not happen. Daniel stood frozen at the altar. I felt a twist of guilt, but beneath it was something stronger. Instinct. The car door closed with a soft click. Inside, it smelled faintly of leather and clean air. I folded my hands in my lap to hide their trembling. Where are we going? I asked. Somewhere private, he said. Not my home. Not my office. Neutral ground. I watched him carefully. You expected me to come. It was not a question. I hoped you would choose the truth, he answered. That is different. The car moved through downtown Boston, past brick buildings and corner cafes that had always felt familiar. Today they looked like a backdrop from someone else's story. You said I was monitored, I said after a moment. Explain that. He rested his forearms lightly on his knees, leaning forward slightly. Focused. Your prenatal lab results this morning were flagged through a private network before you even left the clinic, he said. I did not request that alert. Someone else did. My security team intercepted it because my name was attached to the genetic file. My stomach tightened. So someone was waiting for confirmation. Yes. The word landed heavy between us. I pressed my palm against my abdomen unconsciously. 12 weeks. A life forming quietly while adults maneuvered around it like a chess piece. If your family wanted leverage, I said slowly, why not approach me directly? Adrian's jaw tightened. Because direct moves create resistance. Subtlety creates compliance. Compliance. The word made my spine straighten. I am not compliant, I said firmly. For the first time, something almost like approval flickered in his eyes. I know, he replied. The car turned onto a quieter street lined with brownstones. No gates. No visible guards. Just a discreet townhouse that looked like it belonged to a lawyer or a professor. What is this place? I asked. A property under a different name, he said. No connection to Romano Enterprises. The car slowed. My pulse quickened again, but it was no longer panic. It was anticipation. Answers waited behind that door. And for better or worse, I had stepped away from the altar to find them. The townhouse door closed behind me with a quiet finality that felt louder than the church doors had. Inside, everything was understated. Neutral walls. Polished hardwood floors. No family portraits. No visible security panels. It did not look like the residence of a man whose name carried weight across boardrooms and headlines. It looked temporary. Intentional. Adrian stepped aside, giving me space to walk in first. That small gesture unsettled me more than dominance would have. You can leave at any time, he said calmly. The door is not locked. I glanced back automatically. The brass handle sat untouched. Freedom within reach. Yet I did not move toward it. Show me, I said instead. He nodded once and led me into a study at the back of the house. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, cutting across a large wooden desk where a slim laptop and several sealed folders were arranged with deliberate order. No clutter. No chaos. Just preparation. He did not open anything immediately. He looked at me first, as if confirming I was ready. I folded my arms across my waist, protecting something I could not see yet felt fiercely aware of. Start with the medical records, I said. He slid the first folder toward me. My name was printed across the tab in clean black ink. Inside were copies of hospital logs from the night of the fire. Admission time. Oxygen levels. Observations from staff. My eyes scanned quickly until something caught. A consent form for genetic testing. Signed electronically. My signature. Or something that looked exactly like it. I do not remember this, I whispered. Adrian did not interrupt. He let the silence stretch. There was a timestamp. 2:37 in the morning. I remembered being exhausted. Disoriented. I remembered wanting to go home. Why would genetic testing be required for smoke inhalation? I asked. It would not, he replied. Not routinely. The implications settled in slowly. This had been inserted. Requested. Approved under confusion. I flipped to the next page. A notation that samples were sent to a private lab affiliated with Romano Enterprises Research Division. My pulse spiked. You are telling me your own company processed this? A subsidiary, he corrected quietly. One that reports to a board, not to me directly. I looked up sharply. So someone inside your structure had access. Yes. The admission cost him something. I could see it in the tension along his jaw. And you did not know. Not until this morning. I closed the folder carefully, aligning the edges as if control over paper might restore control over my life. If this was about succession, I said slowly, then whoever arranged it assumed I would never question it. Adrian stepped closer to the desk, but kept distance between us. They assumed you would either comply quietly or disappear quietly, he said. My breath caught at the second option. Not because he described anything violent. Because he described erasure. The kind that leaves no trace. I walked toward the window, pressing my palm lightly against the cool glass. Outside, a delivery truck passed. A man jogged by wearing headphones. The world remained blissfully unaware. Why intervene now? I asked without turning. Because once the pregnancy was confirmed independently, leverage becomes real, he answered. And real leverage creates urgency. I rested my hand protectively against my abdomen again. 12 weeks. A heartbeat I had heard only once. If I am leverage, I said quietly, then I am also a liability. To some, he admitted. I turned to face him fully. And to you? For a long moment, he did not answer. Then he said, steady and unflinching. To me, you are someone who was used without consent. That is not acceptable. The statement was not romantic. It was resolute. And for the first time since this began, I felt something shift. Not trust. Not yet. But alignment. Alignment is a dangerous thing when your entire life has just been dismantled. I felt it settle between us anyway. Thin, but undeniable. I walked back to the desk and opened the second folder without asking permission. Inside were internal emails, redacted names, forwarded messages discussing timeline confirmation and asset stabilization. I swallowed. Asset. That was what I had almost become. Who benefits if I deliver this child under their control? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Adrian leaned against the edge of the desk, arms folded loosely, watching me read. Control of voting shares, he said. My grandfather structured the company so that bloodline heirs carry weighted influence. If I do not have a recognized successor, certain divisions pass to extended relatives. I absorbed that slowly. So I was insurance. Yes. The honesty did not flinch. I flipped to another page. A projected calendar mapped backward from my expected due date. Meetings, board votes, public announcements. Everything calculated around a timeline I did not even know existed. They expected me to stay quiet, I murmured. Marry Daniel. Move to the suburbs. Raise a child who legally binds me to your empire without ever stepping into it. Adrian's gaze sharpened slightly. They underestimated you. I let out a breath that felt almost like a laugh, but there was no humor in it. They also underestimated your tendency to interrupt ceremonies. For the first time, the corner of his mouth lifted faintly. Not amusement. Recognition. I did not interrupt to claim you, he said. Quietly. I interrupted because once your marriage license was filed, jurisdiction over your medical records would shift through spousal rights. That would make it easier to isolate you legally. My stomach dropped. I had never considered that marriage could be used as a legal shield by someone else. Daniel had not known. I believed that. But ignorance did not cancel consequences. So you needed me unattached, I said slowly. Temporarily, he corrected. The word lingered between us. I ignored it. What happens if I decide to walk out of here and go to the press? I asked. Expose everything. He did not hesitate. The board will deny it. They will present the pregnancy as consensual and planned. They will question your mental stability due to the fire trauma, and they will offer you a generous settlement to remain silent. The strategy was clinical, predictable, terrifying in its simplicity. I closed the folder firmly. Then I do not go public yet, I said. Adrian studied me, something like respect settling into his expression. What do you propose? I moved to the center of the room, thinking aloud now. If they are monitoring the pregnancy, then they are monitoring me. That means they believe I am still unaware. We use that. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in calculation. You are suggesting we let them think their plan is working. Yes, I said. I attend appointments. I act confused. I do not confront anyone directly. Meanwhile, we gather proof that the genetic consent was falsified. Silence filled the study for a long second. Then Adrian straightened. You understand that aligning with me places you inside a conflict that has existed long before you. I met his gaze without hesitation. You said I was used without consent, I replied. Now I am choosing. The distinction mattered. A faint nod acknowledged that. Then we do this carefully, he said. No sudden movements. No public accusations. I rested my hand lightly over my abdomen again, feeling the weight of what was at stake. Careful is not the same as passive, I warned. His voice softened, but it did not weaken. I would not expect you to be passive. And for the first time since the church doors opened, I felt something stronger than fear. Strategy. Strategy sounds powerful in theory. It feels different when you are the one being watched. By the time dusk settled over the brownstones outside, the study no longer felt like a temporary refuge. It felt like the first square on a chessboard. Adrian closed the folders and locked them inside a slim metal case. The click echoed softly in the room. If they are monitoring through the lab network, we assume they are also tracking insurance claims and appointment confirmations, he said. You will continue seeing your original obstetrician. I nodded slowly, and I act like I am overwhelmed. Confused. Grateful for their guidance. The word grateful tasted bitter. He studied me for a moment. You do not have to perform weakness convincingly. You only have to avoid confrontation. I crossed my arms, pacing once across the hardwood floor. That might be harder than you think. A faint shift in his expression suggested he believed that completely. We also need an independent physician, he continued. Someone outside corporate networks. No digital cross-reporting. Cash payments, I said automatically. Paper files. Exactly. The ease with which we built this plan unsettled me. 12 hours ago, I had been choosing floral arrangements. Now I was designing medical counter-surveillance. My phone vibrated in my hand. The screen lit up with 23 missed calls. Daniel. My chest tightened. I had not allowed myself to process what I had done to him, or what this would look like to everyone who had filled that church. You can answer, Adrian said evenly. I shook my head. Not yet. If I heard Daniel's voice, the version of my life I almost lived would pull at me again. I needed clarity before emotion. I moved toward the kitchen at the back of the townhouse. It was modern but minimal. Clean counters. A single glass of water waiting as if someone had anticipated my thirst. I poured another and took a slow sip. My reflection in the stainless steel refrigerator startled me. Smudged mascara. Wedding makeup fading. A bride who had walked out before the vows. When do we tell them we know? I asked quietly. Adrian joined me in the doorway but kept his distance. We do not, he said. Not until we have proof of procedural tampering. Digital signatures can be forged. We need the original authorization logs. I leaned against the counter, absorbing the weight of that. And if they escalate? He did not answer immediately. His gaze dropped briefly to my abdomen, then returned to my eyes. Then I remove you from every structure they can access. The words were calm, controlled, not dramatic. But beneath them was an edge I had not heard before. Not threat. Promise. You would burn your own board for this? I asked. A pause. For control over my future, he corrected. I watched him carefully. There it was again. Not ownership. Alignment. Our interests intersected because someone else had tried to dictate both. My phone vibrated again. This time an unknown number. Manhattan area code. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly. They are checking stability, he said quietly. Let it go to voicemail. I placed the phone face down on the counter and exhaled slowly. Somewhere inside me, fear still lived. But it was no longer paralyzing. It was directional. Tomorrow, I said firmly, I schedule my next appointment. I let them think I am compliant. Adrian nodded once. And tonight, he asked. I looked around the quiet townhouse, the city lights flickering through tall windows. Tonight, I replied. I stopped being the variable they calculated incorrectly. The night did not bring sleep. It brought clarity. I stood by the tall window in the guest room Adrian insisted I take, watching headlights move like quiet currents along the street below. The townhouse was still. No visible guards. No dramatic security systems blinking in the dark. Just silence that felt deliberate. I pressed my palm lightly against my abdomen again, not because I could feel anything yet, but because it reminded me this was no longer theoretical. 12 weeks. A heartbeat measured in a sterile room that morning. A timeline someone else had tried to control. My phone rested on the nightstand. 37 missed calls now. 3 voicemails from Daniel. 1 from my mother. 2 from unknown Manhattan numbers. I finally pressed play on one of the unknown messages. A calm female voice introduced herself as a patient liaison from the clinic, gently reminding me of the importance of consistent prenatal monitoring and offering to coordinate support resources. Support. The word felt rehearsed. Too smooth. I deleted the voicemail without saving it. A soft knock sounded at the door. Not urgent. Not intrusive. It is unlocked, I said. Adrian stepped in but remained near the threshold. He had removed his jacket. Without the tailored precision, he looked less like a headline and more like a man carrying weight he did not ask for. My security team confirmed increased digital pings on your medical profile, he said quietly. They checked twice in the last hour. I nodded once. They are nervous. Yes. He watched me carefully. Are you? I considered the question honestly. I am alert, I replied. Fear feels inefficient right now. Something in his posture shifted. Approval again. Respect. Tomorrow, he continued, you will receive a call from a different number. A more senior representative. They will offer private transportation to your next appointment. I will accept, I said immediately. His brows lifted slightly. You are certain? If I decline, they escalate. If I accept, I gather information. I walked toward the small desk in the corner of the room and opened a notebook that had been left there, blank and waiting. I start documenting everything. I added timestamps, call durations, names, inconsistencies. He stepped further inside now, closing the door halfway, but not fully. You understand this becomes larger than exposure, he said. If we prove board interference, it restructures control permanently. I looked up at him. Then they should not have involved me. The simplicity of that truth hung between us. He exhaled slowly. You were never meant to be visible, he said. Only functional. The word stung, but it also solidified my resolve. I wrote the date at the top of the notebook page in clear ink. Underneath it, I listed fire, genetic consent, lab transfer, clinic alert, monitoring escalation. You said earlier that you intervened because leverage becomes real once confirmed. I said without looking up. Be honest. If I had not gone to that clinic today, would you have left this alone? Silence stretched for a moment longer than comfortable. Then, steady and unguarded, he answered, No. I met his eyes. Not possession. Not control. Choice. Good, I said quietly. Outside, another set of headlights passed beneath the window. The city continued moving, unaware that somewhere inside a quiet townhouse, a woman who had walked away from her wedding was rewriting the terms of her own future. And this time, every move would be intentional. Morning arrived without softness. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the townhouse, sharp and revealing, as if the city itself expected a decision. I had not changed out of the simple clothes Adrian's assistant quietly delivered during the night. My wedding dress was folded. Somewhere in a garment bag downstairs, a symbol of a life paused mid-sentence. My phone rang at 9:15 exactly. Unknown Manhattan number. I let it vibrate twice before answering. Charlotte Bennett speaking. My voice sounded steady, polite. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Executive Director of Patient Relations. Not a liaison this time. Higher authority. Warmer tone. We understand yesterday may have been overwhelming, she said smoothly. We would like to ensure you feel supported throughout this journey. Journey. I wrote the word down in my notebook as she spoke. I appreciate that. I replied evenly. I was planning to confirm my next appointment. There was a brief pause, almost imperceptible. Of course, she said. We have reserved a private suite for your future visits to ensure discretion. Reserved. As if this had always been expected. That is thoughtful, I answered. My schedule is flexible. Adrian stood across the room, silent, listening without intruding. When the call ended, I met his gaze. They escalated, I said. Private suite. Executive contact. He nodded once. They are consolidating access. I exhaled slowly. Good. That makes the pattern clearer. At 11 o'clock, a black SUV arrived outside the townhouse, precisely as predicted. Not flashy, not aggressive, just controlled. Adrian did not accompany me to the vehicle. It is important you appear autonomous, he said. I will be present indirectly. I stepped onto the sidewalk alone, shoulders squared, movements calm. The driver opened the door without a word. Inside, the leather seats were immaculate. The windows slightly tinted, but not enough to feel hidden. As the car pulled into traffic, I watched the city blur past. Coffee shops, office buildings, ordinary lives continuing without awareness of corporate chess games tied to a single heartbeat. The clinic entrance looked unchanged from the morning before. Glass doors, neutral signage. A receptionist greeted me by name before I reached the desk. We have prepared the suite for you, Ms. Bennett. Suite, not exam room. I allowed a small, appreciative smile. Thank you. The hallway leading to it was quieter than the public wing. Carpeted, soundproofed, controlled access doors. Every step felt curated. Inside the private room, the equipment looked identical to standard prenatal care, yet the atmosphere was different. More intentional. A senior physician entered within minutes. Older, confident. He shook my hand and held eye contact slightly longer than necessary. We want you to feel completely informed, he said. Transparency is essential. I nodded politely, sitting back against the cushioned exam chair. Then let us begin with the consent form from 8 months ago, I replied softly. For a fraction of a second, his composure shifted. Almost imperceptible, but I saw it. And in that small crack of hesitation, I understood something important. They had calculated my silence. They had not calculated my memory returning piece by piece. I folded my hands over my abdomen gently and met his eyes without flinching. This appointment was no longer about routine monitoring. It was the first move in proving that I was not an asset to be managed. I was the variable they failed to predict. The physician did not sit immediately after I mentioned the consent form. He remained standing for a fraction of a second too long, reviewing a tablet that I could not see. Then he smiled, measured and professional, and took the chair beside the exam table. All necessary documentation was completed during your emergency admission, he said smoothly. Standard protocol. Standard. The word echoed in my mind like a misplaced tile. Genetic screening is not standard for smoke inhalation, I replied calmly. I kept my tone curious, not confrontational. His eyes flickered once toward the door, then back to me. In cases involving potential hypoxia, expanded panels can be authorized, he said. Precautionary. I nodded slowly, as if absorbing new information. Then I would like a printed copy of the original authorization log. Not the summary. The time-stamped submission. A pause. Subtle, but real. We can provide an abstracted version, he offered. Abstracted. Filtered. Controlled. I folded my hands loosely over my abdomen and leaned back slightly. I prefer the original. Silence settled in the room, heavy but polite. The physician adjusted his glasses. There may be confidentiality limitations. It is my body, I said quietly. Confidentiality should not apply against me. For a moment, something almost like calculation passed through his expression. Then he nodded. I will submit the request to records management. Submit. Not provide. I made a mental note of the phrasing. He shifted topics smoothly, guiding the conversation toward routine measurements. Blood pressure, weight, fetal heart rate. The familiar rhythm of medical equipment filled the suite. When the small, steady heartbeat echoed through the monitor, something inside me softened despite everything. Real. Alive. Not corporate leverage. Not boardroom strategy. A child. I closed my eyes briefly, memorizing the sound. The physician watched me carefully during that moment, perhaps expecting gratitude or vulnerability. I offered neither. When the exam concluded, he handed me a printed summary sheet. Clean. Polished. Sanitized. No mention of prior genetic authorization. We will contact you within 48 hours regarding your records request, he said. I appreciate your patience. I stepped off the exam chair slowly. I appreciate transparency, I corrected gently. His smile thinned by a degree. In the hallway, the receptionist avoided direct eye contact. The private corridor felt narrower on the way out. As I exited the building, the black SUV was already waiting. The driver opened the door without speaking. Once inside, I allowed my shoulders to relax for exactly 3 seconds. Then I reached for my phone. A new message waited from an unknown internal email forwarded anonymously. No subject line. Just one sentence. The authorization was executed under Directive 7. My pulse accelerated. Directive 7. I had never heard of it. I forwarded the message to Adrian's secure address before the vehicle even pulled away from the curb. Outside the tinted window, Manhattan moved like nothing had shifted. Inside the car, everything had. Because Directive 7 did not sound like medical procedure. It sounded like policy. And policies are written long before emergencies happen. Which meant this was never spontaneous. It was prearranged. Directive 7 did not leave my mind the entire ride back to Boston. The words looped like a code I was supposed to recognize, but did not. By the time the SUV stopped in front of the townhouse, Adrian was already outside, phone in hand, expression sharpened into something colder than before. He opened the car door himself this time. I received it, he said quietly. Not a question. I stepped onto the sidewalk and searched his face. What is Directive 7? For a moment, he did not answer. He led me inside first, closed the door, and walked straight to the study. Only then did he speak. Directive 7 is not medical, he said. It is corporate contingency. The word contingency tightened my chest. Explain. He unlocked the metal case, retrieved a separate encrypted tablet, and turned it toward me. On the screen was a restricted governance document bearing the Romano Holdings crest. My eyes scanned the bold header. Directive 7, Bloodline Stabilization Protocol. My pulse pounded in my ears. Stabilization, I repeated. Adrian's jaw was rigid. If the primary heir's succession path becomes uncertain, the board is authorized to secure genetic continuity through controlled identification and confirmation. I felt the room tilt slightly. Controlled identification, I whispered. That means they pre-select candidates. He nodded once. Women within proximity during qualifying events. Public appearances. Corporate functions. My mind flashed back to the charity meeting the night of the fire. The seating charts. The photographs. I was on a guest list, I said slowly. Not random. No, he confirmed. Silence pressed in around us. I read further down the document. Language about emergency authorization. About digital consent during incapacitation. About laboratory discretion under executive seal. My signature. My body. Reduced to policy. Did you know this existed? I asked without looking up. His answer came steady. I knew of contingency protocols. I did not know the board had activated this one. Activated. Like I was a switch. I set the tablet down carefully, aligning it with the edge of the desk. My hands did not shake. That surprised me. Then this is bigger than leverage, I said quietly. This is institutional. Adrian stepped closer, not to dominate the space, but to stand beside me instead of across from me. Yes. I inhaled slowly. If Directive 7 was executed under emergency conditions, then there is an authorization trail. There is, he replied. It requires 3 senior board signatures. I turned to face him fully. Then we find which 3. His eyes held mine, something resolute settling there. You understand what that means. I did. It meant confrontation at the highest level. It meant exposing not just tampering, but intent. It meant unraveling a structure built on control. They assumed I would never read the policy that used me, I said. That was their miscalculation. Adrian's voice lowered, but it did not waver. Once we identify the signatures, we can trigger internal review. Quietly. Without public scandal. No, I said firmly. He stilled. No. We gather proof first, I corrected. But when we act, it is not quiet. They wrote a policy that treated me as infrastructure. My hand moved protectively over my abdomen again. They do not get quiet consequences. A long silence passed between us. Then, slowly he nodded. Not as a board member. Not as a figurehead. As a man choosing alignment. Then we proceed carefully, he said. But we proceed. Outside, the city lights flickered on one by one. Inside the townhouse, Directive 7 lay open on the desk, no longer a hidden clause buried in governance. It had a face now. Mine. The signatures were not hard to find once we stopped looking at surface documents and started tracing internal approval chains. 3 names. 3 digital seals. All executed within 14 minutes of my hospital admission 8 months ago. 14 minutes to convert a human being into a contingency plan. I stood in the study with the printed authorization trail spread across the desk, each page aligned with deliberate precision. My pulse was steady now, not because this was smaller than I thought, because it was exactly as large as it appeared. 2 of them sit on the executive board, Adrian said quietly. The 3rd is my uncle. I absorbed that without flinching. Family. Governance. Control woven together until it was difficult to separate affection from authority. Does he know I walked out of the church with you? I asked. Adrian met my eyes directly. He knows everything within 12 hours. The honesty did not surprise me anymore. I stepped back from the desk and moved toward the window again, watching the city lights shimmer against the darkening sky. Then we do not give him 12 hours this time, I said. We move first. Adrian's voice lowered slightly. If we trigger a formal internal challenge, the board will demand mediation before exposure. Good, I replied. Mediation creates records. He studied me carefully, as if recalibrating his understanding of who I was. You understand they may attempt to negotiate. They can negotiate corporate shares, I said evenly. They cannot negotiate my consent. Silence filled the room, but it was no longer heavy. It was decisive. I walked back to the desk and picked up the tablet displaying Directive 7. The language looked colder now that I understood it fully. Bloodline stabilization protocol. Controlled identification. Emergency authorization. Words written by people who never expected the subject to read them. We gather the evidence, I said. We secure independent legal counsel. Not affiliated with Romano Holdings. Adrian nodded once. I have someone in mind. I shook my head gently. No, not your contact. Mine. His expression did not harden. It shifted into something like respect. You are drawing a line. Yes, I said simply. If this is alignment, it is equal alignment. For a long moment, he did not speak. Then he said, steady and unguarded, I do not want control over you, Charlotte. I want control over what was done to you. The distinction settled between us like a contract without paper. I rested my hand lightly over my abdomen again, aware of the quiet life at the center of this storm. Then we begin with the signatures, I said. Tomorrow we notify the board that an independent audit has been requested. Adrian inhaled slowly. That will fracture alliances. They fractured first, I replied. Outside, a car passed beneath the townhouse window, headlights sliding across the walls like moving lines. I thought about the church aisle. The almost vows. The version of me who believed safety meant predictability. That woman no longer existed. In her place stood someone who understood that power without consent is simply control wearing a suit. I turned off the tablet screen, letting the room fall into softer light. They wrote a protocol for succession, I said quietly. Now they will learn what happens when the variable refuses to stay silent.